I read a piece in ESPN the other day that USC has one of the toughest non-conference schedules in all of college football. Well, that's objectively true. They have a neutral site game week 1 against LSU to begin the regular season, and they end at home against Notre Dame, a team who I talked about last week on the show, who I think is going to be an 11-1 football team. So, yeah, tough schedule here for USC. I think they're going to overachieve. Everyone continues to just set the bar low. They just are setting the bar low. The FanDuel win total for Lincoln Riley, despite making the defensive coaching investments and changes that he needed to do 2 years ago, admittedly, despite making those moves, the win total is 7.5. I think it's partially a reflection of the schedule. You know, Lincoln Riley and USC wanted to get out of this game against LSU week 1. I don't blame him. Not with the way that other schools have manipulated non-conference schedules. He's looking at LSU and Notre Dame and saying, I have to win, or I face tough questions, or I face pressure, and fans, boosters get unhappy and such. So let's predict all 12 USC games right here. I've been a fan of USC's offseason. I think Miller Moss is good. I think their offensive line is an underrated question mark here. But do you know who didn't land everyone that they wanted to in the defensive line? You know who has at least a couple questions up front? LSU. LSU, you've heard pundits, maybe, I have at least, like Josh Pate talk about whether LSU is going to hold up along that defensive line. If you're not poised to capitalize on USC's offensive line, I think the Trojans are going to be a pretty good team this year. I felt this for a while, and I'm going to back it up. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is here, at least in the show sense. So, week 1, neutral site, Sunday game, September 1st. By the way, we're 19 days away from college football. Do you realize that? I know. It's great. September 1st, Allegiant Stadium, LSU, USC, big game. Trojans are a pretty sizable underdog here. I think USC is going to win the game outright for 2 reasons. Number 1, you're going to have more Trojan fans at this game because of the proximity to Los Angeles than LSU fans. And if that is not the case, shame on you, Trojan fans, because this should be a 60-40 home crowd in favor of USC. That's the first reason. The second reason is you have a couple of quarterbacks and a couple of third-year head coaches who I know can be good. I just don't know whether they are good, because I haven't seen them start for an entire season. I know what the potential is. I know they're capable. And so if you're asking me to choose between those two guys, yeah, who has a better track record with quarterbacks in the last 5 years in college football than Lincoln Riley? The answer is nobody. That was a rhetorical question. So I lean towards Miller Moss over Garrett Nussmeier, but both certainly very, very capable. Both have had defensive overhauls, and I like what USC has done. So give me the Trojans to beat LSU. This is not going to be a popular pick, but that's how I feel. That's just how I feel. I don't hate you, LSU. I don't think you stink. I don't think Brian Kelly's awful. I just think USC is going to find a way to win that football game, surprise some people, so they go 1-0. Then they come back home, they play Utah State. That's an easy win. Then they go on the road at Michigan. I was talking about that defensive line. I don't know if there's really anyone in all of college football, let alone on the Trojans offensive line, that can block Mason Graham. That Michigan front four should be very good. It's probably going to be the strongest aspect of their defense, which again should be good. They've got Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator. This game is in Ann Arbor. I'd still probably like Michigan if it were at the Coliseum. I think USC's home field advantage is average at best, quite frankly. I've been in that stadium before. It's it's fine. It's not bad. It's not, like what they have over at UCLA across the way at the Rose Bowl. They fill it up more than that, but it's nothing to write home about. So at Michigan, in Ann Arbor, I think that's USC's first loss of the year. Then they come back home where they play a Wisconsin team who will give them a fight. But I like the Trojans in that spot. I think they have the better roster. I think you've got the better, more proven head coach. And you certainly have an advantage at quarterback there. I don't think down in sunny California, that Wisconsin Big Ten physicality, push them around, it is going to slow down the USC offense in the way that Badger fans might hope or think. Next week, at Minnesota. I think Minnesota, I don't have a great feel on Minnesota, to be honest with you. I think Minnesota, maybe they could be all right. You could talk me into 6-7 win team, maybe. I like USC here. I'm sticking with the Trojans. because until someone gives me a compelling reason to pick against them, a team that I've liked all offseason and still like going into the year, I'm going to pick them to win the football game. So I think they win at Minnesota, and they start the year 4-1. This should be a top 20 team at this point with the resume they have, with a win over LSU and a loss at Michigan, and then wins over Wisconsin and Minnesota. Then they come back home. I think this is loss number 2. I think this is loss number 2 because I like the improvements that I expect to see from USC on the defensive side of the ball. I think Penn State is a more complete football team. And Drew Aller with Andy Kotelnicki as his offensive coordinator coming over from Kansas this offseason should be able to take a leap forward. I think they're going to be good enough on that side of the ball. And don't forget, when people think about Penn State, they jump straight to the way they play against Michigan and Ohio State, which were, single-digit games a year ago, mind you. But when Penn State plays people not named, Michigan and Ohio State the last few years, they've been great. They have not been good. They have been great. So I think Penn State is the more complete team. I think they go all the way across the country, and they get the win in the Coliseum. Then it's a trio of victories, 2 of them on the road for USC. At Maryland, I don't have high hopes for the Terps and Mike Locksley this year. I think he's a really good guy. I think he's a decent coach. I don't love their quarterback situation going into this year. I don't even know if they love their quarterback situation going into this year. They come back home against Rutgers. That would be a sneaky tough game. Rutgers is a sneaky tough team in the Big Ten. That is, I would not want to travel to Piscataway. There is a team that is going to travel to New Jersey this year that on the surface you'd say, they won't lose to Rutgers. And I'm going to pick them to lose to Rutgers. You'll just have to keep tuning into the show to find out who that is. But that's not USC in this spot. At home, they'll be okay. Next week, they go at Washington in Seattle. Again, first-year head coach. Even Jed Fish described Washington as a complete and total reset this year. I'm not saying Washington isn't going to have urgency to win at home or that they don't want to play well or they won't play hard. I just think USC is a better football team. I think they've got more talent, and I think they are more put together. The system is more established. Everything there screams a USC win. But then they come back home, and I think this is the final loss for USC in the regular season. I like Nebraska. Dylan Raiola doesn't have to win the Heisman Trophy in his freshman year for Nebraska to be a good football team. You might say, Nebraska wasn't that good. Nebraska did this. First of all, Nebraska was a 5-win team last year. That's not great, but it's not horrible. They weren't some train wreck dumpster fire outside of the quarterback position. If they fix all of that, I think their weapons are fine. I think they'll be elevated by Dylan Raiola at the quarterback spot, but that is a good defensive staff. I expect them to be able to run the football. They have a couple of really, really talented running backs, and I think Nebraska is just a good team. By the way, they have the same win total as USC. That's not by accident. It's not by accident. Because FanDuel, I think, sees what I see, which is, Nebraska's a good team. Then USC, this could be a really, really great game, and it could come down to a field goal, a play, a drive, a stop. I could see this one going either way. But I like Nebraska because I think their defense is going to be able to travel. And I like that side of the ball a little more than, say, Wisconsin down at the Coliseum. So I think that is the last loss of the regular season for USC. And they'll be sitting there at 7-3, and everyone will be asking questions, and the pressure will ratchet up on Lincoln Riley. And then he's going to go play a team who I've been down on all offseason. I continue to be down on, and the more I think about it, the more I think I might have their record prediction at some point on the show be one of the worst records that I do a prediction for. If you have a team you want me to do, let me know. But that team is UCLA. UCLA is going to be in for a rough year. And last year, Lincoln Riley lost that game to UCLA at home. That was a bad loss. That was a bad, bad loss. Should not have lost the game. I think he is going to go in incredibly dialed. You're going to have motivated, energized USC players for that rivalry game. Certainly UCLA will get up for it. I understand that. USC is the better team on both sides of the ball and at head coach especially. I think they go in and dog walk the Bruins in the Rose Bowl there. And then they come back home and they beat Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is going to be undefeated going into that matchup, and USC is going to get the win. Final week of the regular season, at home, I like Notre Dame. I like their staff. I like the players they've got. I like Riley Leonard at quarterback. But I like USC. If this game were in South Bend, Notre Dame's losing. But the good news, they're back at home. And I think that USC has enough to win that football game. So USC, overachieving this year at 9-3. That's overachieving to a lot. Is that a playoff team? Probably not. You probably can't get in with 3 losses. It's not impossible. You could be in the discussion. You could be around the playoff. But I think Lincoln Riley does not have another down year. And remember, this is a guy who in a full season of college football has only won fewer than 10 games once. That was this past year. Changes have been made. I think they could get to 10-2. That's probably their ceiling with this schedule, which is far from a cakewalk. I think 10-2 is their ceiling, but I think they end up going 9-3 with losses at Michigan and at home to Penn State and Nebraska.